Hi, I'm Todd Allen, and I serve as the Senior Executive Medical Director for the Healthcare Delivery Institute at Intermountain Healthcare. Our purpose today is to talk about teams, or more accurately, 4 critical concepts that lay out and serve as the stabilizing foundation of team function within a quality improvement setting. First, we would like to briefly review the research literature around teams, develop a formal definition of what a team is as opposed to other work structures that we use within healthcare organizations, and provide a diagnostic checklist by which you can tell if a team is working well or not working so well. Second, we want to lay out a particular model for quality improvement-based problem solving. Well, said more specifically, an improvement model that ties very well to team function. Third, we will define the roles and key components found on a high-functioning team, specifically team leaders, facilitators, team members, and define their specific roles within the team, as well as list some functional tools by which team members can achieve success in their roles. And finally, we need to define and contrast just a little bit the terms storybook and storyboard. These terms grow out of the same team-based structure and are important terms for defining the work and successes of a quality improvement team. These tools are also the method that we will use for project presentations at the end of the course.
The main source that we will use to describe team function comes from Sir Richard L. Williams, an article that he published in 1998. Dick Williams, as a young man, studied organizational dynamics in Great Britain and contributed so much to that literature that he was knighted by the Queen for his work. Sir William defines a team as a cohesive, interdependent unit that can direct itself to solve organizational problems. Teams don't just happen. They require very thoughtful planning, leadership, and organization. They can be very productive and personally satisfying. In fact, people who've experienced a full interdependent team may have ruined their future for other forms of work-performing organization. Williams described team development in the form of 2 orthogonal pieces. First, relationship functions, and second, task functions. He drew very heavily upon the seminal work of Bruce Tuckman. In 1965, Tuckman published an article entitled Development Sequence of Small Groups. He was a social psychologist working in a think tank setting on a contract for the United States Navy. The Navy had moved to small vessels with small crew complements. In trying to understand that problem, Tuckman collected every available article on group development and came up with the classic structure of a team first forming, then storming, then norming, then performing. In 1977, Tuckman updated his article in conjunction with Marianne Jensen. They added a 5th element called adjourning. According to Tuckman, during a team's forming stage, they concentrate on why questions, orientation, understanding the group and its assigned function. During the storming phase, you see active conflict, sometimes hostility. It's really individuals within the group trying to establish a pecking order or to maintain their independence relative to the group as a whole. As they work their way through those issues, they come to the norming phase. That's where they start to open themselves to ideas from other members of the group, develop a certain amount of group cohesiveness, see themselves as a functional unit. Very often in this phase, they'll take play breaks. The key is noise. During the norming phase, communications are essential. A very high level of conversation among members of the group. And finally, they hit that performing stage where they focus on the problem to which they've been assigned, hopefully with some very good achievement of goals. Williams took Tuckman's 4 levels of team development and applied them against the axes of relationship and task function. He pointed out that most work groups within an organization routinely function at level 3. It takes an external pinch or challenge to push them up into level 4 team performance. Of course, in other circumstances, we form teams explicitly to deal with the challenge. Williams used his structure to point out that most working arrangements are not teams. He defined at the lowest level a group. Those are people that lack leadership, lack a common direction, and particularly lack results. He described them as, a group of people in an elevator, or people sitting around in a doctor's waiting room. In fact, if someone attempts to provide leadership or to communicate, it's often met with, well, active hostility, or at least resistance. Williams described a second form of organization that he called a mob, very individualistic, no leadership, with tactical, short-term thinking. What's in it for me? No leadership means mob disorganization. In fact, the reason that many mobs are associated with violence is that self-disorganization combined with a lack of leadership. The third organizational structure that Williams described is a gang. They have very strong autocratic leadership with a hierarchical management. They tend to be quite territorial and can be aggressive in defending their territory. In other words, they're empire builders. Very often they seek to establish all of their own resources so that they don't have any external dependencies. The final form of organizational structure that Williams described was a committee or a task force. Usually a committee is made up of a chairperson plus various members, but those members bring representation or expertise. In other words, the committee is equal to its strongest, most committed member, the one person who's willing to do the work. You see, most of the people who come only attend the meetings. They don't spend time outside of the committee meetings preparing, collecting information, sharing results. Committees tend to be very highly organized. People on a committee demand policies, fixed procedures. They tend to be quite cumbersome, bureaucratic in an organizational sense. Because of that, their work output tends to be relatively low. Well, at least if you've experienced a real team. While the output of a committee is usually limited to the capacity of the single most committed member of the group, teams tend to be synergistic. To illustrate, on the major teams where I serve, I expect to spend about 4 or 5 hours of preparatory work for every hour that we spend meeting together. Teams tend to place the long-term success of the group and the activity to which they've been assigned well ahead of their individual goals or desires. In other words, in scoring points, let's say. Most important, the thing that distinguishes a team from other group structures is that team members tend to be consensus-seeking. Consensus means finding a solution that is good enough that all members of the team can support it. No member directly opposes it. It's not a unanimous opinion. It's not a majority vote. It's not everyone being satisfied. The way I really think of it is that no one's forced to swallow a poison pill, to throw their life on the tracks career-wise relative to the decision that the group makes. The foundational idea for a consensus-seeking team, we might call it the marketplace of ideas, or better still, an arena for ideas. Good teams are seeking solutions, and they understand that it may require something that's different from what's happened in the past. They generate lots of ideas. Even though most of those ideas might not work, some of them will. And the trouble is you really can't tell when you begin. Having generated ideas, they next test them carefully. You put those ideas in the arena and let them fight it out. It's going to turn out that almost all of them will have some weaknesses, but some of them will have some very potent strengths. Good teams can take that series of ideas, cull them, and put them together into a unified whole, creative solutions that really, really work. For a group to function as a consensus-seeking team, you must exhibit 4 qualities. My favorite description of them comes from Scott Peck, the pop psychiatrist's 3rd book, A Different Drum. He was describing communities, but the quality improvement literature uses the same features to describe consensus-seeking teams. I just like Scott Peck's terminology a little bit better. Well, good teams are first, safe, second, inclusive, third, open, and that leads to the 4th feature of consensus seeking. Safety. You know, in many organizational settings, when people supply ideas, it's as if we're connected to them by a thin, invisible umbilical cord. They're the child of our mind. If the idea succeeds, then we personally succeed. Of course, what that means is if someone criticizes my idea, it's the same as criticizing me, isn't it? Or I might try to promote an idea based just upon my authority or my rank within the organization. It's when you sit down and say, well, Joe, Remember that stupid idea you supplied last year and how poorly that worked out? Why should we listen to this idea now, based upon that past performance? Connecting the person to the idea, as if somehow they were one. Last year's idea doesn't determine how well this one will work. It could turn out on close examination to be very, very strong. Or, Joe, you just don't have the position, the rank, the experience to make that statement. Again, as if good ideas versus bad ideas depended upon who supplies them. In the arena of ideas, ideas have to stand on their own. And more particularly, if you're going to get a wide array of ideas to test so you can sort the wheat from the chaff, people have to feel confident that they can supply them without experiencing personal attack. Inclusivity is the idea of functional diversity. Once those ideas are in the arena, I want to attack them from every possible angle. So I very specifically value people who bring different viewpoints. It's the idea of the 10 blind men and the elephant. It's really good to have somebody who sees it as a tree trunk, or a fan, or a floor, or a rope, or a snake, or a spear. Or an even better image is maybe a CAT scanner, where you look from thousands of different angles to see what's happening in the middle. Irving Janis wrote a classic text called Groupthink. Within that text, he shows what happens when teams stop being inclusive. He describes exclusive teams. Well, Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs was his primary example. They start to judge people in the group by cohesion to the group's idea. So if you criticize, it means you're trying to politically subvert, and they thrust you out. Well, good teams are inclusive. It means more than just this idea of a free exchange. It also means porous boundaries. If we reach a point where we need a little bit of fundamental knowledge that wasn't there from the start, perfectly okay to bring someone new in. Or if we're working on a part of a problem that doesn't apply to these two team members, they say, call us back when you get back to our stuff. Entirely appropriate and acceptable. The third element is one of the hardest. A good team is open. That means that we're open to other people's ideas. In some sense, you're directly trying to counteract, dominant strategies. Some dominant strategies are based around authority gradients, where because someone's higher, someone's lower, the person with the higher authority gets a louder voice more of the time compared to someone with lower authority within the organization. There are other ways of dominating as well. Overwhelming enthusiasm so that others don't have a chance to speak or to criticize. Taking a position of unrequited angst for reasons that you can't specify. That one just doesn't feel right to you somehow. Well, in fact, they all don't feel right except for your preferred approach. Openness is fundamentally honesty. It's being willing to ask what's right rather than who's right, and to consider every opinion on the chance that you'll find a stronger idea. Now, if those three elements are in place, of safety, inclusivity, and openness, it's possible for a team to be consensus-seeking. And you get the most interesting group dynamic. I've watched teams settle on solutions that you would have thought were impossible. But because they helped craft the solution, because they understood the weaknesses and the strengths and put them together into a unified whole, they work wonderfully well. In counterpoint, I've seen other groups take solutions that should have been dead-on, slam-dunk successes and make them fail because they could not function in that way. Dr. Paul Batalin is one of healthcare's early quality pioneers. Originally a pediatrician from Minneapolis, he served as the vice president for quality at HCA, based in Nashville, Tennessee. And back before Rick Scott bought HCA, made it Columbia HCA. In striving to teach people how to use quality improvement problem-solving methods, Paul came up with a nice acronym, something you could easily hold on your mind. He called it Focus PDSA. It works very well to describe how teams function within an organization's problem-solving efforts. The action starts with what's called a guidance team. It's usually a management group. It's their job first, the F of focus, to find a process that needs improvement. Most often they have to tap what we call the voice of the process, the voice of the customer, data systems that shows how your processes are functioning and compares them to your customer's need. Once you've found a process that needs improvement, the Guidance Council organizes a team. They name a team leader. They select a facilitator. They identify team members. More important, in this formal structure, it's the job of the management group, the Guidance Council, to generate an aim or a mission statement. At that point, the focus shifts to the project team. At their first meeting, their first task is to clarify the aims. They generate objective statements. Then they begin to use specific quality improvement tools to understand the process. Cause and effect diagrams, tally sheets, Pareto charts, run charts, scatter diagrams, the full list that we've described in other parts of the course. Finally, they stabilize the process. With the process stabilized, they're ready to begin to run rapid cycle improvement. Plan, do, study, act cycles. Paul called this whole process Focus PDSA. Find a process, organize a team, clarify the aims, understand the process, stabilize, then run rapid cycle improvement. Oh, the last step goes back to the guidance team. After the project team has completed their work, it's the job of the guidance team to implement the recommendations. Please pay careful attention to what I just said. I didn't say it was the management group's job to decide whether they liked the recommendations, decide whether they had the resources to implement it, to give it a thumbs up, thumbs down. Their job is to implement without question. Now that may sound a little strange, to just ask them to step in and do. It's going to make sense though in a few more minutes when we come back to this concept. In a quality improvement organization, project teams have three specific elements. They are first a team leader, second a team facilitator, and finally team members. I'd like to take those a little bit out of that order just to make it easier to understand. First, team members. Think of it this way. All quality improvement activities are based around frontline value-added work processes, according to Dr. Deming. Down at the process level, the only person who really understands how the work gets done is someone who does it every day. That's the definition of fundamental knowledge. The main role of team members is to supply fundamental knowledge. If you have a process then that has several steps within it, you need a representative of each of those steps to come together and give you that information. Their work doesn't end there though. It's that you want to involve everyone at the front line in the problem-solving and design process. As the team completes its work, as they generate those graphical tools, the cause and effect diagrams, the Pareto charts, the run charts, team members should be taking them back to their frontline counterparts. They don't ask for approval. It's not just to inform though. What they really say is, what would you change? What have we overlooked? It's that you want to tap the fundamental knowledge across the entire front line, and at the same time you want some ownership. Remember Sir Winston Churchill's famous statement, people like to change, they just don't like to be changed? Another way of saying that is no surprises. It's the job of your team members to help their frontline counterparts be part of the process, to contribute, to own. It's going to make a critical difference when it comes to implementation time. You're going to be sprouting those seeds in well-prepared ground if your team members are doing their job. Therefore, when you're picking team members, think in terms of leadership. Realize that by asking someone to serve on a project team, you're developing leaders for the future. The second critical element of a project team is the team leader. Very often that team leader is a member of the guidance team, part of the management group. This is going to turn out to greatly facilitate the communications that have to take place between the project team and the guidance team as the work moves ahead. The team leader schedules and chairs team meetings. They set the agenda. They record all team activities. And finally, it's their job to routinely and regularly report back to management, to the guidance team. Key element in that list. It's critically important that the team leader not shuffle off the duty of recording team activities to the facilitator, to a secretary, to some other individual. They must report to the management group, and so it's critical that they're able to report fully and completely. Team leaders manage a critical organizational resource. Those project teams cost lots of money in terms of personnel, resources, thought, priorities. Therefore, one of the most important functional tools that a team leader can have are meeting management skills. Meetings have very specific purposes. For example, you might meet to share information or to train, to set vision, or to share skills. You might be there to prioritize or to coordinate work activities across a group. You might have sent people out to gather information, bring it together to try to put it into a cohesive whole. The point is that, well, every meeting is set to accomplish some sort of value-added work, and you can evaluate how well the meeting went by how well it achieved those goals. Remember, meetings are expensive. Have you ever played this game? Sitting in a boring committee meeting, just to go around the table and estimate how much each of those people cost per hour in terms of direct salary and fringe benefits, and then total it up for the length of time that you spent together. You find yourself asking, boy, was this decision worth $8,000 to the organization? Well, yeah, massively important in terms of an organizational resource. Well, huge investment. And then you're asking yourself about return on investment. The single most important tool that a team leader can use to guarantee value-added work from team meetings is an agenda. An agenda really is the work plan for this work activity. It's interesting, within Intermountain, we very often will spend more time building an agenda than we do conducting the meeting. And it makes sense to have one or two individuals invest that careful planning rather than asking a room full of 10, 15, 20 individuals to work through it because it wasn't carefully prepared. Other critical tools are the 7 quality improvement tools. Remember those? Yeah, cause and effect diagrams, flow charts, tally sheets, Pareto charts, run charts, SPC charts, scatter diagrams. Those tools are documented proof of the team's work. Well, more important, things that you can show to others for their criticism and to bring them along. The same is true for the 8 quality planning tools and for the other tools that you will learn in the course. That approach of an agenda and well-established quality improvement tools means that a work group will have documented results. As important, you should evaluate meetings to see if you're accomplishing your work goals. That might take the form of a simple, informal, well, person-to-person evaluation at the end of a meeting. Some people do it more formally with simple questionnaires that they hand around to team members. It's all part of making your work effort more productive, of showing more value to the people who empowered and launched the project team. The third critical role in a project team is that of a team facilitator. Well, in fact, in this course, that's our aim, to help you gain the skills, the knowledge, the application necessary to be an effective facilitator. The key thing in the facilitator role is this idea: you own the team's health. Well, what am I saying? I really mean that it's not your job to solve the problem that the team has been assigned. That belongs to the team leader and the team members. Your job is to be certain that the team is healthy enough that it can solve that problem. This is sometimes a very, very difficult role. It's so easy to get pulled into the problem solving. Well, especially given your secondary roles within the team. Yes, number one is to see to the team's health. Number two is to supply the tools. You'll know the various quality improvement tools. Many of your team members will not. In fact, that's your third role, training. The very best training we can give to members of your organization about quality improvement will come in that just-in-time form. Hands-on experience with the tools as you apply them as part of a real problem-solving process. And finally, you will probably need to help the team leader understand their role, perform it effectively, a certain amount of offline conversation, consultation back and forth. Oh, remembering that you shouldn't let the team leader shuffle off critical roles onto you. Now, more on that in just a minute. Let's go back though and re-examine that first and most critical role, the health of the team. The reason that I truly love those 4 critical elements of team health, safety, inclusiveness, openness, and consensus seeking, is because I can use them as a checklist. For example, it happens to me every couple of years. As a vice president for Intermountain who works in this area, one of my colleagues will ask me to come in and help with a team that's struggling. They're usually hung up somewhere along the way. Well, last time it was our vice president for information technology. He needed a critical decision, roughly a $10 million purchase. His team was hopelessly deadlocked. Don't you love it when they ask you in that circumstance? Well, I guess it's not that bad. There's nowhere to go but up. What I asked him for was about a half hour of the team's time. I used that time to describe to them the features of an effective team, pretty close to the way that I just described it to you a few minutes ago. We talked about safety, inclusivity. We talked about openness and consensus seeking. You know, I think the group breathed a sigh of relief. It had been such a fight that to come and talk about something where they weren't fighting, a much better way to spend a half hour. Oh, at the end of that time period, we generated something called ground rules. That's the key idea. Ground rules. We sat down and produced a list of how we were going to behave as a team in our future interactions. Specific behavioral rules. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to go through such a list with you just so you'll get a feel for them. In fact, that's what I did with this team. I didn't ask them to start with a blank sheet of paper. I gave them a couple of example lists just to get them started, and we generated their own. Now, after we generated the list of ground rules, I posted them. Posting is the second critical concept with ground rules. Posting, that means they're up on the wall big enough that everybody can see them. At the first meeting, I just took an overhead projector sheet of acetate and wrote them out by hand. By the second meeting, I had them in 3-inch black letters on a big piece of foam core. I wanted them to kind of dominate the room. With the ground rules posted in front of the group, my role becomes enforcing the ground rules. Life just became a lot simpler. Well, for example, with this particular team in information technology, as the conversation heated up, as the gloves started to come off, if maybe safety started to be compromised, my favorite technique, now remember, I'm sitting back and watching the health of the team, observing those interactions as a facilitator. That's my role. My favorite technique is to look them dead in the eye and then just glance up at the ground rules. Simple, subtle, non-verbal. Hey, I'm watching you. Remember what we agreed to? It's amazingly effective. Sometimes when that's not working so well, it's even a little more heated, I'll rely upon the general broadcast announcement. Hey guys, remember the ground rules? Point, point, point. See the idea? Only on rare occasion am I forced to go the nuclear option. It's called a timeout. And as a facilitator, that's always within your purview. Timeout, stop. You can stop the meeting. What you're really going to do is have a meta discussion. A meta discussion is a discussion about how we discuss. It's time to re-examine the ground rules, how we're going to interact with each other. Now you can see in that environment, a good set of ground rules are critical. Again, the way that you construct good ground rules is in terms of the 4 principles. You have to have every principle represented. As I mentioned earlier, it's tremendously useful to prime the pump with a list from another group. That's what we prepared here. This is a list of ground rules from a real team within Intermountain. Let's just step through them for a minute. I'd like you to think about what each one of these represents. Number 1, all team members and opinions are equal. To me, that's certainly an openness statement. It's trying to counteract dominance. It may also include a little bit of inclusivity, that you want functionally diverse viewpoints to get strong solutions out of the group. Number 2, team members will speak freely and in turn. We will listen attentively to each other. Oh, I think that's inclusivity, openness. Each must be heard. No one may dominate. Clear openness. Number 3, problems will be discussed, analyzed, or attacked, not people. A clear safety statement. Safety is perhaps one of the most important things on the whole list. It needs to be very clearly represented. Sometimes having 2 or 3 safety statements is not a bad thing. Number 4, all agreements are kept unless renegotiated. What's that? Well, it turns out it's a consensus statement. You see, consensus doesn't just mean that I won't undermine the group decision after I leave the meeting. Consensus means that I'll put my shoulder to the wheel, that whatever we agree we're going to do, I'll do my level best, my darndest, to make it succeed. Number 5, once we agree, we will speak with one voice, especially after leaving the meeting. A very clear consensus statement. Number 6, honesty before cohesiveness. Well, we're back in that marketplace of ideas. This is inclusivity as opposed to exclusivity, by the way. Back in that marketplace of ideas, I will honestly criticize to find the weaknesses and the strengths of each proposal so that we can craft a good solution. Again, honesty means inclusiveness. Number 7, consensus versus democracy. Each gets his say, not his way. Again, a clear consensus statement. Number 8, silence equals agreement. It's another consensus statement. It means that you can't lowball the process by being silent in the meeting, then going out and undermining it after the meeting. Don't speak up, you're committed. Just as if you'd raised your hand high and voted for it with all your might. Item number 9 on the list, members will attend regularly. That's a consensus statement too. It means you can't lowball the meeting by not showing up. Don't show up, you're still committed to what the group agrees in a true interdependent team setting. The final item on the list, meetings will start and end on time. That's just a functional rule for the group to help them plan and operate more efficiently. Many other participants in the class have explained to me that relative to how their projects are working, they're really assigned to a dual role. They ask whether it's possible to simultaneously be a team leader and a team facilitator. The truth is it is. Really, these formal structures are most important when you have a team that's sick, that's not functioning well. That's when you really need someone in that facilitation role. Oh, and it really does work. Just to illustrate, I went into that IT team. We spent a half hour. I spent the rest of that meeting facilitating, making sure they stayed healthy in their interactions. It was a little quiet and polite, but they made some solid progress. I showed up at the next meeting with my foam core and my postable ground rules to put up in the room. Fascinating thing. By the end of that meeting, they came to a true consensus decision. And we moved ahead. We moved ahead in good faith, with goodwill, finding a solution that could work for everybody. Do you always have to have a facilitator? No. In fact, my best guess is in most of your team interactions within your organization, you're healthy enough in general that it won't be essential, but sometimes it will be. And it's not bad to practice, frankly. It goes a step beyond that, though. When we talk about productive team meetings, using the tools wisely and well, getting meetings to function at the level they can and should, based around team principles, will just boost your productivity. It'll also boost the fun in work. It'll make you a better, more effective quality organization. Oh, some other ideas that have come forward. Some of our established teams say, you know, it's no fun being a facilitator. I really want to get involved in the problem. Can't we all facilitate? Every member of this project team is a trained facilitator. Well, you know the answer to that. If everybody owns it, nobody owns it. You know, I'm the classic example. I know the rules well enough that I can violate core team principles pretty much better than anybody else I know. And I have a tendency to get caught up in a problem and do exactly that. I'm not a good governor of my own behavior. There are circumstances where it's really handy to have someone else who has that assigned role and isn't being distracted from it. Another thing that some of my teams have asked, well, we're all trained facilitators. It's not as much fun to be the facilitator. Can we rotate? Can one of us take that role at one meeting, another at another meeting? Yeah, you can, if you're disciplined. It takes some real discipline to keep in mind your assigned role and not get pulled in, well, to problem solving within the team, and the facilitator basically disappearing. Now again, that's not critical in most circumstances. In most circumstances, you'll work well enough that the facilitation role is not essential as a standalone function. But remember, there are times when it will be essential. In that circumstance, sometimes it's very useful to bring in someone from the outside, someone who isn't as likely to get caught up in the problem, someone who's a not just trained but experienced team facilitator who really will focus on that central critical role. A few minutes ago, we mentioned the idea that after a project team has finished its assignment, has carefully analyzed the problem, come to possible solutions and tested them so that they have now documented solutions, that they take their work back to the guidance team, the management group, and it's then the role of the guidance team to just do it, to implement without question. How could that possibly be? Well, it's actually built into the structure of these teams. Remember how we described that interaction between your team members with their fundamental knowledge, acting as a two-way channel, bringing fundamental knowledge up to the project team, but then analysis and proposed implementation solutions back down to the front line. No surprises. Everybody knows what's coming. They've had a voice in it. They're changing themselves as opposed to being changed. The same thing happens from the team leader up to the guidance team as well. The whole reason for requiring the team leader do the documentation is to guarantee that you can carry the message back and forth. Typically, our guidance councils will meet, well, weekly, sometimes as long as monthly, not often very much longer than that. They're doing the same thing to the senior management group that the team members are doing to the front line. They take the cause and effect diagrams, the flow charts, the tally sheets, the Pareto charts, the run charts, the SPC charts, well, all of the work product of the team, and as the work progresses, they're sharing it back with the management group. It can be fairly short and pithy, but very high content. You see, that's where the management group gets their voice. If they don't like the way it's proceeding, if they say too much resources or a competing, conflicting priority, that's when they say it. It makes sense then, doesn't it, that when the project is finished, the guidance team only obligation is to implement. Yeah, they've been active in the process from day one, actively engaged, actively understanding, more important, actively contributing. Now, we call that documentation a storybook. It's really a simple idea. It's based around the concept that a good project team documents its steps, that the tools that they use are hard copy, are written down, are shareable. Imagine that the team leader just takes those written documents, three-hole punches them, and puts them in a binder, and perhaps adds a few sheets in between with some simple connecting verbiage so that it flows together in a natural progression. That's called a storybook. It's a history of the problem solving that the team undertook and the solutions that they reached. There's a special shorthand form of that we call a storyboard. A second major format for problem solving in a quality improvement environment comes from Dr. Joseph Juran. He divided it into 3 steps. The first he called the diagnostic journey. That's where you identify a problem, set it up, begin to understand where the process fails. The second major step he called the remedial journey. That's where you hypothesize particular solutions around a very well identified specific problem and run PDSA cycles to find out what really works. He added a third step though that's critical. And the reason I really like Dr. Juran's approach is, well, he contributed this and most others seem to skip past it. He called it holding the gains. After I've gone through the diagnostic journey to focus the problem, the remedial journey to find solutions, demonstrated much better improvement, well, how do I make sure that over time those don't slip away from me? That's the structure that we'd like to ask you to use as you do your project presentations at the end of the course. They're called storyboards when you make them into a simple poster form. What we've done here is to map Dr. Juran's diagnostic journey, remedial journey, and holding the gains into Paul Batalin's focused PDSA. Elsewhere in the course, we'll add a third model, very, very similar, that describes how the tools are explicitly used. On the final day of this course, though, we're going to ask you to stand in front of the group and present your storyboard. We provided some very good examples of former projects, very successful storyboards on our website and offer those to you for your review and emulation. What we've done in the last few minutes is to really summarize the factors that make a work group into a team. We've used Williams and Tuckman's research to define a team, to describe the levels of team function: forming, storming, norming, performing. We've used that to identify a series of critical factors that really determines the health of a team. Is it safe? Is it inclusive? Are the team members open to all ideas? Are they truly consensus seeking? That's the key element that you're trying to build toward. We've talked about, well, a model for team function, Paul Batalden's Focus PDSA. We've mapped that into Dr. Joseph Duran's diagnostic journey, remedial journey, holding the gains. We've taken that a step further and described the 3 critical roles within a team. The team members, who are that channel to the front line, both directions. The team leader, who's a similar channel to the senior management. And as important, has a set of key functional tools that has to do with, well, meetings as a work activity, a value-added work activity that produces value for the company. And finally, we've talked about storyboards, how you can take the work of a team, document it because we use hard copy tools, and put it into a story that you can share with others. Thanks very much for your time and attention. I'm very excited to see your own successes with your teams as you move your quality improvement activities ahead.